for years we've had this whole stigma of what the old trailer home looks like, the trailer in a trailer park, and that stigma is dying off as Gen Z and millennials are starting to see and understand. But overall, typically these homes, because they don't last forever, they will deteriorate. They're not based on real property. They are considered personal property, so they depreciate. It's a different aspect than where, let's say, if you have in a multifamily environment where you have mostly renters, or even in a single family subdivision where you may have a large mix of renters.
Hello, and welcome to Chat MHC, sponsored by Rise 360 Ventures. My name is Daniel. This is Ali. Rise 360 Ventures is a manufactured housing investment fund. For more information, go to www.rise360ventures.com to download your free investment report and access additional valuable content. We asked AI, what are the top 10 MHC questions? And AI gave us the answers. Today, we're going to dive into the basic topics that people have been wondering about this industry. In this conversation, we're going to talk about where those answers ended and where 45 years of boots on the ground real world experience begins. Let's dive into it. Why people ask AI about MHCs? Ali, what do you think about some of these points?
I think it makes sense. People are concerned about affordability. People are concerned about being able to buy a house in the American dream. Many people look at this from an investment standpoint, and when you have a lot of other saturated asset classes, they're looking for an alternative asset class. So that makes sense. It's always been a staple for retirees. And more communities, especially on the 5-star end, the 4 and 5-star communities, are starting to offer more and more, amenities for seniors. So that's really cool. And then equally, for years we've had this whole stigma of what the old trailer home looks like, the trailer in a trailer park, and that stigma is dying off as Gen Z and millennials are starting to see and understand, the benefits of living in these communities, the update to the homes themselves. They're not the trailers anymore. They are truly manufactured, homes now. And so those stereotypes and misconceptions are starting to gradually phase. And so it makes sense that these are the kind of questions that are being searched when it comes to MHCs. And I want to emphasize for the audience, Daniel, that MHCs and MHPs are often still referred to interchangeably. So a lot of people still call them mobile home parks, as I will interchangeably by habit. Although manufactured housing community is such a step up in terms of how we to describe these places, because it's not about being mobile, and it's not about being a trailer park. It's about actually being a permanent community and a thriving one.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you said. I mean, in this conversation, we're gonna cover everything from all points of view, from landlord, from tenants, from investors, the affordability and housing shortages. It helps everybody. It helps the tenants because manufactured housing communities being the most affordable form of home ownership. And that fact actually lends to its stability, which is appealing to investors.
Yes.
And then, which brings us to the investment curiosity. It's a great asset class. Even a lot of institutional money that used to not be attracted to this asset class is now very attracted to this asset class. And where smart money goes is where we should be looking. The retirement and active adult community are looking for ways to maximize their dollar, especially in this macroeconomic environment. They can downsize to these great communities with amazing amenities that may not have been as prevalent, 15, 20 years ago, as you actually told me. And they can build rapport with other residents because they're so family oriented and family friendly now that they have playgrounds, swimming pools, clubhouses, and the fact that you are residents in this community together, it builds a us versus them camaraderie that they can experience in, which is very important in retirement when you're not finding friends through work and through going out as much anymore. And the misconceptions and outdated stereotypes. You were telling me that you had gone to a factory and you couldn't tell the difference between the manufactured home and an actual stick-built home. I remember you mentioning that. If you want to comment on that a little bit, and the amenities inside or the details inside that made it so hard to kind of decipher the difference.
By the way, this was even almost 15, 20 years ago. And so imagine all the developments since then even. And I think of, I think of like the surveys that I don't know, I've seen on commercials like the Coke and Pepsi surveys they used to show back in the day where you do a
Yeah.
taste test or a wine test, and how many people get it wrong and think Pepsi's Coke or vice versa. And I was
Hmm.
standing at a factory after having grown up in this industry, and they had plopped a stick-built home and a manufactured home side by side with similar designs and whatnot, and overall aesthetics and whatnot. And so I was blown away as to how structure the structural integrity of the home, the aesthetics, though the overall appeal. Like with eaves and island kitchens, for example, and just slanted pitched roofs and whatnot. And so all these kind of things. When you think of a mobile home or a trailer, you think of the standard box, and you don't think of a nice warm contemporary feel that you might get in a stick built, and that stigma, that stereotype is just it's outdated. And
Hmm.
so I failed the test, as many of your viewers,
Yeah.
our viewers, would probably fail the test, having not even grown up in the industry. It's fascinating what's happened, Daniel, to the industry,
Yeah.
to the home, and to the industry overall.
Yeah, definitely. And to our viewers, I hope these questions and answers will help you kind of update your knowledge on this asset class. So moving on to the first question that AI said. So we asked the first question, the most common question that people ask is, what is a manufactured home? And basically what AI said was built in a factory to HUD standards, more affordable, energy efficient, mobile homes built before 1976, site-built homes constructed on site, transported in sections and installed on a foundation. Let's go ahead and kind of expand on this a little bit. If you want to kind of
Wow.
start with, I guess, the mobile homes built before 1976 and the HUD standards, kind of and more affordable and energy efficient. I all kind of blend together if you
Yeah,
take it.
I think This is gonna be challenging, Daniel, because that's a
Yeah.
pretty thorough reply. And I certainly want to give the human contribution here and
Hmm.
maybe add to it. But I think that statistically and technically, this is a pretty good reply. So or a good response from AI. And bottom line is that before 1976, these homes were not up to code,
Hmm.
up to HUD code, and HUD standards. So those trailers in the past and the actual mobile homes in the past technically weren't built like for
Oh, and
example.
sorry to interrupt you, but just to clarify for the viewers, HUD stands for the Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Yes, and it's a federal regulatory system that applies across the nation. And then, of course, within each state, by the way, I'll add to that each state has standards and requirements. And so, for example, here in California, where we're very active, we meet HCD requirements, housing community development as well, and the MRL, mobile home residency law. And so those are some additional areas that maybe weren't mentioned, that aren't mentioned apparently yet in this discussion from AI. But yeah, all of these things are absolutely right. So after 1976, where I think that's where the clear distinction between mobile and manufactured kicks in, because of the quality and the integrity of the structure and the build out of the home itself. Um, you know, what is a manufactured home and how does it differ from a mobile home? Again, it's the quality. Try taking your stick built home down the freeway at 60 miles an hour. Imagine that. Imagine, I mean, we struggle in California thinking about a 5 second potential, earthquake and the kind of cracks or, God forbid, even worse that might happen to our stick built homes. And these manufactured homes go down the freeway at 60 miles an hour and survive. So,
Yeah,
so
they experience these potholes that simulate earthquakes every few minutes.
Yeah, yeah. And so I don't think, the rage or the viewership baiting highlights that you see on the local news about how, mobile homes or manufactured homes are flying across the sky in a tornado or hurricane. I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's a fair reflection. I'm sure it gets views, I'm sure it gets an audience, but I think a manufactured home just does just as well, if not perhaps better, than a stick built might in some of those scenarios. We just get a bad rap, historically because of other reasons, which we can probably get into as we get down into this presentation or these
Yeah.
questions. But in any case, I think the overall answer is pretty good. What you can't touch, what it doesn't touch, is how these changes on the home and in the communities has really kind of appealed to the younger and newer generations, right? So that's where sure, you can have the technical answer, but in reality, where humans are living in these homes, and the things that community owners and operators are doing to make it more inviting for families and for seniors,
Hmm.
is incredible today.
Yeah. And then I actually read somewhere that I don't know how much truth there really is to this, but manufactured homes are made with 20 to 30% more structural material than stick built. Thus, they're given kind of they're structurally secure. Kind of gives to the fact that that example that you came up with of driving down the freeway at 70 miles an hour.
Well, I can tell you this, instead of two by fours that are used in a regular stick built in manufactured homes, they typically use a two by six
Mm,
for the wood beams and for the structure. So just that in itself, as an example of
yeah.
the dramatic difference in quality, I think is a great one.
Yeah, and to end this slide off, I just wanted to go a little bit further than the slide mentions the more affordable and energy efficient. A couple other kind of standards that HUD brought in was roof load, wind resistance, fire resistance, and among other kind of criteria that they inspect for to
Yeah,
get for regulations.
yeah. I mean,
So
it's
moving on
fascinating.
to so moving on to number two. Can I buy or rent a lot in the community? And what AI said is many own the home and rent the lot. That's the traditional method. Some parks offer home and lot ownership, which is kind of complicated. And as we've kind of been experiencing, there's a whole new model for that. Others are fully rental based. That's the other form of manufactured housing communities where you rent both the home and the lots instead of owning the home, and clarify with the park ownership park to understand your rights and responsibilities. And also, follow-up question is: do residents typically own their homes, the land, or both? So I guess
Uh,
I'll start off with there's two main forms of ownership or not or the lack of ownership in manufactured housing communities. One is the landlord owns the land and the lots. The tenant owns the manufactured home and pays a lot rent for their home to sit on the land. And the second way is for the landlord or lot to own both the lot and the land, and the tenant just rents the home and the lot as if it were an apartment or a single family home. So those are the two traditional methods. The if you want to start off with the kind of some park owners offer home and lot ownership. That one was the newer kind of
Well,
look.
yeah. So I'm going to just tackle this in a different way, Daniel.
Okay.
I mean, I think the overall what the AI isn't saying clearly is, and I'm just in my casual layman terms. Let me just say it as a human. um, these communities are largely divided between family parks and senior parks. Senior parks are where you have to be 55 years or older to be the primary applicant. So you'll still have some younger folks living there, but you can't typically be the primary applicant or resident in a senior park. And so that's just kind of at a high level in terms of how these parks are divided. And then within that, most parks in a conventional, most parks nationwide, most communities, and I'm going to again use these words interchangeably until I get in the habit of myself of using the new politically correct term. And so most communities, you have what we call as investors and as community owners, you have tenant-owned homes, TOH versus POH, tenant-owned homes versus park-owned homes. So the majority of the industry is set up, the majority of communities are set up where landowners own the land and homeowners own the home. Simple as that. And a side note just on that point, I want to explain the reason for that is let's discuss where this started. The history or the historical reason for that is, these landowners were just that. They were just landowners, families that owned land, and then were banking land, and then decided to create some form of income while they're banking the land. And the easiest way to earn income on that land was to put homes on there that people brought in. And in original case, in some cases, it was trailers, before it was actually homes, but nonetheless, the same point. And so what you had was, this combination. That's how it started. And essentially, it stayed that way because lenders, bankers, appraisers, etc., the market, as the industry became more and more formalized, they said, hey, this is great. Keep this separated because, you don't want to skew income from real property, the land, and personal property, the home. The mobile home or manufactured home, when it sits in a community, not on foundation, but just on on piers and whatnot, in a lot, in a community that is owned by somebody else, the landowner in this case, it is not fee simple like your regular single family home in a lot, on a regular outside lot outside of a community. So it isn't considered fee simple in a community. Therefore, it's considered personal property, much like your car. So it'll depreciate eventually over time in a normal market. And we have some anomalies where homes are actually appreciating. So people might say, what are you talking about, Ali? That's a whole nother conversation. But overall, typically these homes, because they don't last forever, they will deteriorate. They're not based on real property. They are considered personal property, so they depreciate. And if you as a landowner start buying homes and renting them out, and you mix that income, you skew the value, you skew the income between real property and personal property. And now suddenly the whole concept of land banking and being bankable, you're eroding that. You're eroding the bankable value because of that skewing. And so it's frowned upon on the industry, for many reasons, many good reasons. And yet, the challenge of getting these homes purchased and financed and transported and set up and all those costs that aren't easily absorbed by a prospective resident is exactly the reason why we see 50-60% occupancy instead of 100% in an environment where there's a huge housing shortage, as we talked about earlier. So, so the notion of as investors, we like to get involved in assisting in that process, but we still don't want to be we still don't want a lot of park-owned homes. And what we do then is we actually buy the homes under a separate arm. And then we won't rent them. We'll sell them. We'll sell them, and we'll even try to offer financing, or we'll assist in providing financing for those homes, so that essentially there's a turnkey home ready to move in for a prospective resident in our community. And that's how, by the way, we go from 50 or 60% occupancy to 95 or 100% even, because the demand has always been there. We're just making that easy. And so to stay on point, you'll always, I think, I don't know about always, but I think for a very long time in the indefinite future, for the foreseeable future, you will see largely communities with tenant-owned homes as the majority. The idea of actually being able to purchase the lot is something that's relatively new, and also, so I'll say it's unconventional. It usually has been where does exist today. It's been sparked mostly by residents in kind of a us against them type of mindset between residents and landowners. And I don't think it has to be that at all. I'm probably one of the few landowners, community owners that actually is warmed up to the idea and embraces the idea of actually potentially, Daniel, you and I have talked about this, and we're looking at that in one of
Yes.
our own communities, where we're actually, we're open to the idea of exiting, of selling ultimately, not to an institutional buyer necessarily, but in some cases to where it makes sense to the residents. And so we can talk about that more. I know this was a long-winded answer, but
Yeah. Yeah, I can take 10 seconds real quick and just explain that in order to have a resident-owned community, the residents usually establish a company that represents them, and that company can secure a loan to purchase the land from the landlord and then operate that as a kind of co-op.
Right, right, and regardless of where the loan or the equity comes from, where the structure, where
Hmm.
the point is that yes, either a co-op model or even in some cases, you can actually divide the lots
Yeah.
into individual sublots, and where it makes sense, it may be worth it for those, particularly in primary markets, by the or coastal
Hmm.
cities or whatnot. So anyway, there's
Yeah.
different ways to do it, but yeah, I think it's something that's becoming. It's not hugely popular yet, but we're starting to see a little bit more of that.
Yeah. All right. Sounds good. Let's moving on to number three. What are lot rents or community fees, and how much does it cost to live there monthly?
Oh wow. So that varies a lot depending on the market, right? So a tertiary market would be much lower, and I'll give you some ranges. Um,
It's the age-old real estate location, location, location.
Yeah, yeah, and so, but the range, what you see there from AI, the typical cost range of $200 to $600. I would say that's not exactly accurate. That's probably I could see that being in a tertiary market, and maybe some low end, partly lower end secondary markets in some states. But I would say the lower end of the range is probably more an accurate range would be 300, 350 in, let's say, in the Midwest somewhere or in the Southeast. Probably more around 600 and the low end in California. The high end, if rent control wasn't an issue in some of these cities, I think the high end would be somewhere around 2,500 or $3,000 a month just for the lot rent. And
Hmm.
you don't see that because of and this is what AI didn't tell you that I'm telling you, that the true value is somewhere, probably in that range on the high end. In reality, I see rents as much as, $1,200 to $1,500 on the high end in California. I'm
Hmm.
sure the high end is lower than that elsewhere in most markets. So yeah, no, let's
Yeah,
say
I mean, we've even
300.
seen, yeah, we saw that one community that we were looking at, the rents were 400 to 450, and that was kind of tertiary market in the South.
Yeah, right. So, but at the very lowest, you might see 350. I spoke to somebody
Hmm.
yesterday in Pennsylvania that told
Hmm.
me about that they see the rents are as low as 350 out there, which is probably, almost unheard of anymore. I think you're right. It's
Yeah.
more in the 450 range. But again, California is 600 to 1500, and around the country you're probably seeing somewhere around 350 to 450 on the low end to around $1,000 on the high end, and that's just lot rent. So when you multifamily folks or storage folks look at well, especially multifamily folks, and say, wow, that sounds really low, understand that that's you're renting dirt essentially, right?
Yeah.
You're sure there's underground utilities and amenities and whatnot, but you're not responsible for all the structural issues and for plumbing and lights and all of that in every single unit.
Kitchens, bathrooms,
All of that,
roof,
right?
yeah, siding.
Yes.
Yeah.
So so so
And oh, go ahead.
Yeah. No, when you think of when you think of these rents being so low, understand that what you're really looking at an investor, of course, are the metrics of your return on investment, right? So what is the ROI? What is the cash on cash? What is the cap rate? And so that's a whole different conversation that we might get into later, but you can't base that on this absolute number being lower than what you're seeing in multifamily or somewhere else.
Yeah. And a lot of times nowadays, investors, the people on the investment side, they are tending to, this one says may include utilities, trash, special assessments, but a lot of times the investors are now passing those utilities and trash, maybe some water and sewer to the tenants so that they don't bear that expense. And so that actually increases that's popular because it increases the net operating income since it removes an expense from the financials, and it increases the value of the community in an investment terms.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'm glad you brought that up. So you have your base rent, and sometimes the additional add-ons are utilities. There could be some type of special service charge or assessments. Oftentimes, people may rent additional areas like a storage unit or a parking
Parking,
space. Things
yeah.
of that sort that typically get added as and then there may be other pass-throughs that you can add, like whether it's fiber optics or cable and things of that sort. That personal property insurance is another example. So there's
Mhm.
additional ways to pass on benefits and services, and then also increase your income as an operator.
Yeah, and then also when we're talking about manufactured housing communities and RV parks, there's kind of 1 star to 5 star. And when you talk about the higher end, such as that those $2,000, $2,500 a month, then a lot of times those rent fees include other amenities such as the bocce ball courts, the rental of the clubhouse, swimming pools, and other luxuries that the tenants are privy to.
Yeah, yeah, and oftentimes, I mean, I think having a pool or something you might even see in a 2.5, 3 star. But
Hmm.
like you said, the bocce ball courts or tennis courts, or maybe, in like one of our communities, we have 8 man-made lakes, throughout the community, and the white picket fencing and gating all around, and so all those kinds of things you start seeing. You see these are examples of what you'll see in a 4 to 5 star community.
Just out of curiosity, do you guys allow residents to kayak or do anything like that in those lakes, or is it just for?
No, no, but we have wildlife,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and so there's
Adding to the
fish.
ambiance.
Yes, there's actually fish, and there's geese or ducks,
Hmm.
so it's actually pretty. It's really the residents love it, from what I hear,
Hmm.
and so but that's the kind of stuff you'll see in a 5 star community.
Yeah. It's like taking a walk through Central Park.
Right, so different than the stigma, right?
Yeah.
that we
Yeah.
have and that we're overcoming.
Yeah. I mean, in a future episode, we may even kind of bring up the video of those and kind of give guided video tours just to show people what the difference between the different
Yeah,
level communities are.
sure, why not?
But yeah, but moving on to number four, are pets allowed? And what are the community's rules regarding animals? And I guess the most basic answer is it really depends on the community.
Yeah, I
So
mean, look,
most, go
well, so
go ahead.
so yes, generally pets are allowed. I think AI gets this right. And there are definitely some restrictions because safety is a big concern. There typically isn't any kind of pet fee, by the way, as you might see in some other asset classes.
Mm-hmm.
More and more we're starting to see another as an additional amenity. We've talked a lot about amenities. A dog walk or dog park. Dog park, is something that you're starting to see more and more.
Mm-hmm.
But it's absolutely right that you should check the policy at each community. There's been some cases where unfortunately you have some bad actors who have violated the rules, and then when that happens, and if there's been some kind of unfortunate tragedy, in those communities the rules are very strict and they change where you may not be able to typically have a pet. Generally speaking, it's more friendly than other asset classes like multifamily, right? Because it's your home.
Yeah.
So you have more freedom and flexibility to do what you want there versus
Mm-hmm.
the fear that an investor may have in their dwelling.
Yeah. I mean, I personally live in a single family house in an HOA community, and they, even restrict the all dogs must be on leash and controlled in common areas when we walk around our neighborhood. So it's really is not that big of a restriction compared to other other areas to live in.
That's right. That's right. It's very very
Hmm.
typical anymore.
Yeah. All right, number five. What amenities are available? We actually already just covered that in the
Yeah.
lot rent section.
Yes. So the ones that are listed here are pretty standard, right? Laundry and mail and on-site management and those things. The common features that you're talking about in terms of, the building, but like we talked about, as you mentioned, um, a lot of things that aren't very typical. I mean, so let's talk. Maybe what's more beneficial for the audience is what you'll see in a one-star community versus a five-star.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah. There we
so,
go.
so in a one star, for example, you may not even see asphalt on the roads. You'll probably
Hmm.
see dirt roads, or at best you'll see gravel. A lot of times you'll see gravel roads. In a probably from 2.5, 3 star and upwards, you're going to most likely see asphalt. In a one star or 2 star, you might not see street lamps,
Hmm.
and you may not see a gutter system for rain and water and flooding and whatnot. Whereas in 2.5, three, above that range, you will see street lamps. You'll see a drainage system. You might see speed bumps and other kinds of things that you take for granted, but those are amenities. Those are
Yeah.
those are things that you're going to see in a higher end community. And then you can go all the way up the chain, like we talked about, where you see uh, camera security, you see gates, man gates or non-man gates at the
Hmm.
entry and exit points. You see extra parking for visitors, designated, nice parking for visitors. Extra additional parking at each home. Maybe larger lot sizes. And then those extra amenities, like I said, I think we talked about the bocce courts a couple of times because that's a great example.
Yeah.
But tennis courts,
Yeah.
or in some cases, you might even have an on-site store,
Hmm.
a retail store. So at a 5 star or even 4 and 5 star, you're going to see a lot of those extra amenities that you just won't see in a 1 star or 2 star. And of course, the
Yeah.
rents are reflective of that.
Yeah. And also those ones that are profit centers too, like the high speed internet that you can pass on to the tenants and get a margin for the every tenant that signs up and that kind of thing too.
Yes.
All right, number six. How safe is the community? Of course, this is another location question. And questions about crime rates, neighborhood security, and local emergency services.
I think it's all relative, right? And I would
Hmm.
argue that manufactured housing communities are safer than a regular average subdivision. And let me tell you exactly why. So let's review the answers here. It says depends on location and management, and some communities are gated. I don't think it gets into the nuances of what I'm going to explain to you. And
Okay.
so here's
Which
where
is why we're
the
having this episode.
yeah, yeah. So here's the human aspect of experience on the ground, why I think manufactured housing communities are actually safer. First of all, you have a majority of, as we talked about earlier, a majority of homes that are owned by residents. So there's ownership. I don't know if it's politically correct to say pride of ownership anymore. I heard it's not. So whatever the correct way to say that, I want to say that there's
It's news to
real.
me.
Yeah, there's real, uh, ownership of not just the home, but of the community by the
Yeah.
residents. And
The
so,
vigilance of
yes, so that
reporting
that
things.
translates into vigilance. That translates into community. Everybody helping each other. It's a different aspect than where, let's say, if you have in a multifamily environment where you have mostly renters, or even in a single family subdivision where you may have a large mix of renters.
Hmm.
And so we all understand how the dynamics change quite a bit in any asset class when you have the majority of owners versus tenants.
Yeah, when you
So
start calling it your home as opposed to a
yes.
place that you're renting.
Yeah, so that's a big thing. And then I
Hmm.
think, frankly, the proximity, just the natural proximity of how these lots are, near each other and close to each other, it creates a more vibrant community, one that you can't ignore, and it's mostly
Hmm.
all on single level, right? So it's not that you're never going to see your neighbor on the third floor, like you may be in a mid-rise.
Yeah.
Um, you're going to see your neighbors regularly. They're going to see you, and so there's much more of a community result, vibe as a result of that.
Yeah.
Crime, exists everywhere, right? But I think when you're looking particularly at seniors and senior parks, it's way low, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because and for obvious reasons. And so I think in many parks in many communities we have a lower crime rate than what might be average in your city. We have usually a great relationship if management is doing their job and doing it well. They usually have a good relationship with local law enforcement and agencies who can help. Um, Emergency response time. That's interesting. That of course it's going to say it varies. I don't know. I think it's as good as the response in any other asset class. I don't think it varies
Yeah.
because we're in a community versus somewhere else.
Yeah. I mean, you could
So.
have a single family home that's right next to a manufactured housing community, and it will take them exactly the same amount of time to get there.
Right, right. So yeah, I don't think there's any variance there, but I
Hmm.
overall my gut tells me, and I bet you we could find statistics to prove it, that
Hmm.
manufactured housing communities are safer than other communities.
And it goes even beyond that, almost to a psychological level, I feel like, especially just judging by because people, most manufactured housing communities are pretty enclosed. They're not open-ended streets that hit the main road at
Yeah.
multiple points. And so in general, unless you're a visitor or somebody who lives there, you're not going to drive through that community very often.
Yes. Oh, great
And
point.
because of that, whenever you and I kind of drove through communities that we were looking to purchase, we see people, we always just wave hello because when they see us, they assume, oh, that's my neighbor. That's somebody like me who lives in this community,
Right,
and
right.
we have this home ownership in this community in common, and so there's like a camaraderie that kind of helps build that safety net is what
There
I want to
absolutely
say.
is, and it's a great point you bring up, Daniel. I mean, it's everyone typically knows each other, and if they don't know you, the assumption if you're driving through like we do, and we like you said we wave, is that you are connected to someone they know. You're not going to just be there randomly for the most part, right? And so
Yeah.
we're very cognizant of that as we drive through. Just because we understand. To your point, that's how these communities are, and it's great.
Yeah, and not even those communities. It's like I'll walk through our green space at my house, and there's somebody that I don't recognize. And as we walk by each other, we kind of make eye contact and give each other a little head nod or kind of raise a finger and say hello, just because we kind of assume that we both live in this neighborhood. We have this connection.
Right? Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Number 7. Who maintains the infrastructure, roads, water, sewers, and utilities? And does the community manage them? And we kind of already answered this in the previous slides of the usually the landlord is the one that maintains all the infrastructure, the below ground infrastructure, the common area amenities, and then the residents are responsible for maintaining, just like any single family home would be, their home, inside, outside, their yard, and some of the utilities that's not connected to the overall park
Right. So let me
or
add
community.
so the human spin on this is that I get asked a lot of times, hey, is there an HOA or something that helps manage all of the community or whatnot? And in the conventional model that we talked about earlier, where you have an operator who owns the community, a landowner, there is not an HOA. It is that community management company that you basically just said that takes responsibility for those things. Of course, these are all costs. And I'm a big proponent of managed rent increases, and that's a whole nother topic that maybe we'll
Hmm.
cover in a future episode. But I'd
Yeah.
like to have the mainstream audience understand that those things, of course, are paid by the community owner, but those are real costs, and they have to be factored in, into to rent, the rent rates. And so yes, the landowner does it, but of course, every resident has to be a part of actually paying for it and making it happen, and the improvements that come along with that in terms of amenities or other capital expenditures.
Hmm.
Let's see. Residents maintain their, yeah. So you're responsible for maintaining your own own yard, backyard, front yard. Of course, there may be some elements that we still, as a community, most communities will still help with certain things like managing trees that belong to the property that might be on your site, as an
Hmm.
example. Um, and then even then, Daniel, the responsibility of maintaining a yard or debris and those things of that sort on site sometimes becomes a challenge and difficult for residents. Uh,
I was just about to bring that up. For
and so
example,
what we
something
do,
happens on the home
yeah.
and then it needs to be fixed, but it doesn't get fixed. Then what happens?
Right. So what'll happen is oftentimes is we'll provide a solution in our communities, and I see it being done and promoted, or I think encouraged even by the industry associations, where the community will step in and try to help that resident.
Hmm.
And in some cases, absolutely has to do it because if it's a hazard for other
Yeah.
residents or safety issue or whatnot, and if it's a parks or rules and regulations issue, so either by will or voluntarily because the resident wants us to, or because we absolutely have to, the community will
Yeah.
go in and cure whatever that issue is and then ultimately, charge the resident. And if the resident, and oftentimes they will come up with a plan that works
Hmm.
where that resident can pay it in installments or try to come up with a plan to work with them to help resolve the issue.
Yeah.
And
And
ultimately,
these things are the necessary things that you
right.
were mentioning, right? Not like dead plants that might be ugly or something. This is kind of real hazards like broken handrails for the stairs or if the deck is broken and at risk of harming somebody.
Right, right. Sometimes you have, junked cars, abandoned vehicles left,
Yeah.
or things like that. Anything that's really a true safety issue and hazard,
Yeah.
and beyond. And so we try to make it a win-win. I mean, residents want it out of the way also typically. They just can't get to it right away for whatever reason, mostly financially. And so if we can find a way to make everybody, happy and solve it rather than having to go down some legal route. That's what we prefer to do.
Yeah, for sure.
Ultimately, of course, as from now I'm going to put the investor cap on, and so from an
Yeah.
investor mindset, even though you come out of pocket, it's not a loss for you, right? Because again, the resident owns their home, and that's an
Yeah.
asset that you can actually place a lien on. So
Yeah.
ultimately, you do get paid sooner or later. So in terms of bad debt or collecting on these improvements that sometimes you have to make, or these renovation repairs or whatnot, you're ultimately going to collect for the most part because you
Yeah.
can place a lien on the home.
Yeah. All right. Number 8. Are there age restrictions? You touched on this. Some communities are 55 plus, others allow families. And I remember you touched on this on the very first intro to the kind of the two all age communities versus 55 plus communities. And some of the AI answers, at least one resident must meet the age requirement. Family friendly parks allow all ages, and the resident should confirm age restrictions up front before they look to purchase in a community.
Yeah, I think this answer is pretty thorough. I would add one caveat that I don't think it's just at least one resident. I think, the more accurate answer is to say the primary applicant,
Hmm.
must be at least 55. So not
Yeah.
just a resident, but in many cases, it should be the primary applicant. Um,
Yeah.
and as far as my understanding, that may still be the law. So double check that in your state.
Yeah.
Um,
And then there was just another thing that I want to bring up beyond these answers is that California, I don't know if other states have it also, but California does have the companion rule where if you're in a 55 and up and you are 55 and up, obviously, you are allowed to have a companion that's not 55 live with you. And in a year, you're allowed to have up to 3 different companions without asking for the landlord permission. So that's the kind of one of the nuances that isn't the requirement of 55 if you're living alone.
Yeah, especially now, still now with baby boomers, living in these
Hmm.
55 plus communities, and that's the largest segment of the population, right, in our demographics in the
Yeah.
states. So
Hmm.
you have a lot of baby boomers. Obviously, you have them in the 55 plus communities, and they of course, many of them need caregivers. So this is a
Yep.
big issue.
Yeah, definitely. All right, number 9. Can I move my home out? In and out? Can I move my home in or out? And questions about moving manufactured homes, relocation, and policies. So AI basically says moving requires permits, professional movers, obviously complying with community rules. Unfortunately, and the main reason why a lot of these communities become distressed is because of the cost. And so instead, many residents actually have to sell them. And just like you would get a realtor listed on the MLS and sell your home, and then the next tenant, oh, the buyer of the home would come in and take over and become the next tenant.
Yeah, if I had to answer this in one word, if you said yes or no, I'd say no,
Yeah,
because
in
in
practice.
reality, I mean, yes, technically, yes, you can, but in reality,
Yeah.
no. And AI gets it right that the costs, the logistics, the permits, just how difficult and overwhelming it is to actually make it happen. And
Hmm.
who's going to move $100,000 home on average? I don't. When I say average, let's say in California, maybe it's lower in some other markets. But these homes get up to $500,000, by the way. But let's just
Hmm.
say $100,000 home. Who's going to move $100,000 home when it costs you 25,000
Yeah.
and is real or more to move it. And who's going to default, by the way, again putting that investor cap on, who's
Yeah.
going to if I have residents paying me $1,000 a month in lot rent, um, who's going to default on that $1,000 lot rent and giving up the equity of $100,000 home, for
Hmm.
$1,000? So
Hmm.
that's why we don't really see defaults. We see lifetime tenants, um,
Yeah.
and these homes, even if
Unlike multifamily, where people default on $3,000 rent because they only have a $5,000 security deposit down.
yeah,
So,
if that, and so where you have year over year or turnover in multifamily, our tenants are usually literally a lifetime because and if and frankly, at the risk of sounding cold, Daniel, even if for some reason life happens where the resident has to leave or passes away, the home doesn't leave. Like we
yeah.
talked about earlier, the home
Yeah.
stays, and that still remains as an income source for the community owners. Someone's going to move into that home. Someone's going to
Hmm.
renovate. Someone's going to move in. So that revenue income stream remains, even if there is a hardship or for some rare occasion that someone leaves. Otherwise,
Yeah. And then even putting our investor hat on, if someone does come close to defaulting, there's always the same scenario as you see the people in single families that are buying short sales and helping the homeowner get out of foreclosure by giving them a cash offer and purchasing their home to then fix and flip it. So it's a win-win situation where the homeowner doesn't get a hit on their credit or get a hit in their home ownership or default history. They can get out of it, maybe even with a little bit of cash sometimes, get out of it fast, and then move on with their lives. And it's the same scenario with this, in that if somebody gets close to defaulting, there's always investors or us who can step in and help them out of the situation, make it a win-win scenario, and they can move on and not take the hit on their credit, so that they can rebuild and go buy a home somewhere else, and we can take over and make the home kind of available to the next tenant for affordable housing and continue that affordable housing trend.
yeah, I mean, you nailed it. I think. By the way, just a side note coming to my mind is,
Hmm.
people ask me all the time, well, what's your bad debt rate? And like we've been talking about here, in reality, I guess if on the books, if I had to answer, it's probably over the 45 years, I would say it's 3 to 5%, where you actually have, for whatever reason, and usually somebody passing away, where you have a
Hmm.
default on land rent by a tenant. But so that's the technical answer. But in reality, in terms of actual loss of revenue or loss of income, in my 45 years experience personally, it's zero. And
Yeah.
I say that with conviction because what we talked about earlier. You can place a lien on the home, and oftentimes, by the way, as you said and suggested that this is an opportunity. We don't, again, like
Hmm.
I talked about earlier in the very beginning, you don't want to buy homes as an investor under the same entity that you're the homeowner. I mean, the landowner. But separately, what we do in our own communities is we will oftentimes buy those homes, and I don't want to call it a monopoly because it isn't. However, that said, when you're the owner of a private community of 100, 200, 300 units, whatever it is, 50 units, when you're the private owner, you have to be given notice by any resident who is, for whatever reason, thinking about moving or selling. And when you get that notice, you have essentially, again, it's not a first monopoly, it's not a first right of refusal, but we do get an opportunity to help that resident quickly. And oftentimes that's what they need most. So, in giving you an
Hmm.
example where you have a senior who may have passed away and the heirs don't live out of state, and now they're caught off guard with having to deal with the loss of a family member and the expenses of burials and whatnot. And the last thing they want to worry about is this home that they're not going to
Hmm.
live in. And so what they're looking for is someone to step in quickly, take over that alligator of responsibilities,
Yeah.
get paid quickly so that they can have those resources to help with the family expenses and whatnot. And so that's where you're really doing a service for these residents. And at the same time, it's an opportunity for flippers, so to speak, for people who work with us, investors who want to invest just in homes and whatnot, and other operators, to get involved in these communities where you can actually participate in flipping that home, renovating it, and making it available for the next family.
Yeah. And just for the viewers, how we got from this question to the whole default topic is that a lot of people say, oh, why, if they're defaulting on their lot rents, then can they just pick up and move just like multifamily? And so they can just take their home since it's a mobile home or a manufactured home, can't they just take it? And that's why we said the answer is no. Like if you're defaulting on $1,000 lot rent, you're not going to shell out 25 grand to move your home and go someplace else.
Right.
And
Yeah,
that's
I
how
went to a
the
whole different world. Thank you for
yeah,
bringing me
just
back on
that's how
track.
the dots connected to
Th-
the default topic.
yes, thank you, Daniel.
Yep. And so going to the last question that people have been asking AI is what are the rules and regulations, questions regarding quiet hours, parking, modifications to homes or lots. So AI basically says that rules maintain safety and harmony, uh, common rules, quiet hours, parking, modifications with a missing D, trash, landscaping, following the rules prevents fines or eviction.
Yeah. Standard rules and regulations for the park are administered and managed by the park operating company or the management company. They're issued by them. Most of the time, many communities follow, by the way, a guideline or template that's provided by industry associations, which has been collecting data and best practices over the decades. So it's rare that you see some unusual extremely awkward or odd rules.
Hmm.
They're all the kind of typical rules you'd expect in any kind of living environment. But
Hmm.
they're regulated or they're controlled by the community owner. So
Yeah.
that's where they come from. And it's a point I think that's not being clearly defined here, but maybe it's obvious. And yes, not following the rules and regulations of the community can lead to fines. It can lead to eviction. It's not an overnight. It's not like I think owners or management companies would be quick to that, and in some states they can't just rush to that into the
Hmm.
last resort of eviction. But it is certainly a path to eviction if you were to violate the rules regularly.
Yeah. And I wouldn't even say it's kind of a restriction per se, because even when you go to a single family house with no um, HOA or organization whatsoever, the even the city has ordinances of quiet hours. You can't, run lawnmowers before this time or after this time. You have restricted parking in even public streets, and there's, if you let your trash pile up, you'll still get some kind of notices, and if your landscaping kind of builds up and gets really bad, then you might even get a notice from the city. So I wouldn't even say it's too much more strict than a normal city street. So it's not, I don't think it's too much to ask or worry about in this case either.
Right. And as far as modifications to the home or the lots, many communities do have restrictions about whether you can put up a fence or not, whether you can add a storage shed, for example, or not.
Yeah.
Things of that sort. You can,
Or paint your
colors.
house bright pink or
You can't necessarily
whatever it
paint your
is.
house bright pink or purple.
Yeah.
Yeah, things of that sort. Just like much like you'd expect in a lot of other places, those
Hmm.
rules do exist. And I think for the most part, it's so that the entire community benefits as a result. So yeah, uh,
Yeah,
those things are there, but you should check your specific. If you're looking at a particular community, whether you're looking to rent a lot or to invest in, we should review the rules and regulations.
definitely. All right.
Yep.
So we this is basically the overview of what AI misses about the MHCs for kind of new investors or tenants or anybody looking to learn about MHCs that the kind of 45 years of experience and boots on the ground knows that the key they don't teach everything in school type of
Yeah,
type
I
of
mean, hopefully we
topics.
do more of these episodes and we can get into a lot, deeper into different questions that people have within the various audiences, right? So whether it's for residents or for investors or whatnot, happy to dive in and give you much more that AI can. Yeah,
Yeah,
at
for sure.
least. So, yes.
Yep. More of that. And so continue the conversation with Chat MHC about this industry, this asset class. Again, please visit www.rise360ventures.com. You can download your free investment report and watch more content just like this. Again, checking out. This is Daniel and Ali, and thanks for watching.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Ali.